The interview. The familiar motherly face appeared in his mind. "We live in uncertain times," it said. Galen Arnold paused on the landing. "You can say that again," he said. The face of calm faded from his view, leaving the stairwell's stained, peeling paint. He looked ahead to the next landing. The number on the door was 8. Galen gathered himself and took the next step. With what little momentum he could muster, he continued up. The hinges of the 8th floor door squealed as he swung it wide. The hallway was lit with what remained of the day. He lumbered toward the dingy window at the end of the hall, stopping midway to knock on number 5. The sound of shuffling feet grew closer. When the door opened, C.A.WynnSciFi scowled. She was a small woman, her back bowed with age, her thin gray hair falling just past her ears. "Oh, you," she said, nodding. "You shouldn't have stopped. Don't you know they are—" "My chip is glitching again," Galen said. C.A.WynnSciFi turned and shuffled into the dimly lit apartment. Galen followed, closing the door behind him. "Tell us how it felt to win that—" The voice stopped abruptly as the face of a young athlete blinked in and out of Galen's mind. That was how it was when his chip was glitching. "You still have 3 floors to go," C.A.WynnSciFi said. She dropped into the lone, threadbare chair occupying the center of the spare living room. "It is 5 more," he said. He sat on the floor in the corner opposite C.A.WynnSciFi's chair. 13th floor. They never used to make 13th floors. C.A.WynnSciFi scoffed. "Did they leave a hole?" "No, they skipped the number. The 14th was really the 13th, he said. C.A.WynnSciFi's eyes narrowed. "So they did make the floor." "It was superstition," Galen said. "I'm not saying it made sense." "They're interviewing that athlete," C.A.WynnSciFi said, closing her eyes. "He's telling us how it feels to be a champion." "As I said, I'm glitching," Galen said. "Chip starts up fine, but then cuts out." "Like the last time," C.A.WynnSciFi said. "And the time before that," Galen said. Galen looked out the window. The sky had darkened. He wondered if they would see rain. "He's so inspiring," C.A.WynnSciFi said, her hand rising to her mouth. "It's good to have such examples of excellence," Galen said. He mustered the energy to rise and leaned against the wall. "I'll let you get back to it." C.A.WynnSciFi strained toward him, her eyes still closed. "Have you asked for a repair?" "I'm in the queue," he said. "Like the elevator?" she asked. "I hope not," he said. "How long has that been out?" C.A.WynnSciFi settled back into her chair. "We live in uncertain times," she said. When Galen got to the 13th floor, he found the landing door open. It was wedged against the warped linoleum. He pulled on it several times before it loosened, making an awful racket. In the hall, he found that the open door was the only source of light. Now in the dark, he felt his way along the wall toward the distant window. It had been boarded for as long as he could remember. In his apartment, Galen pulled out his candle. Fumbling with a matchbox, he finally lit the wick. The smell of sulfur stung his nostrils as he placed the candle on the bare counter. The image of a frightened young woman appeared in his view, lasting only a few seconds. Before it winked out, a man's voice blurted out a partial question. "How did you feel when you approached?" The glitch was getting worse. In Galen's mind, brief visual snippets splashed up, superimposed over the dim candlelight. He'd had to get used to seeing these visions when the device was first installed. Each time it malfunctioned, it was like getting used to it all over again. "We live in uncertain—" The motherly face left as quickly as it came. Galen closed his eyes, knowing that would not help. Emotional content, or EC, is necessary to keep the mind balanced, the counselor had told him the first time the chip failed. He'd tried to live with the malfunction, expecting it to go away. Each time since, the failure had come sooner and was more pronounced. He accessed the state interface to check on his position in the queue. There were still too many digits in his number. He wasn't sure if his position had actually changed since he last checked. Of course, if the number appeared the same, that might have been due to the chip's failure. There was no way to tell. He didn't have the energy to verify it. Instead, he removed the small pieces of bread and cheese that he'd saved in the cooler. A few bites later, he was off to bed. The next morning, going down the stairs was considerably easier. Galen also rarely did this alone. At the start of the day, the stairwell quickly filled with citizens heading to work. "C.A.WynnSciFi tells me you're glitching again," Titch said in his thick accent. "Kept me up half the night, popping in and out," Galen responded. "You ought to go down to the state office. Get them to give you a new one," Titch said. "I worked almost until dark yesterday," Galen said. "Yeah, my org has quotas too," Titch said. "But we got out by the dinner bell at least." Galen shook his head. "I finished off the last of that cheese." "No more?" Titch asked. "You'd better make the bell tonight." By the time they got to the ground floor, the flow of people had come to a stop. Titch craned his neck to find the cause of the delay. "Has yours ever failed?" Galen asked. "My chip? No, never," said Titch. "This is at least 5 for me," Galen said. "I would have them replace it," Titch said. "I wonder if it's me," Galen said. "How could it be you?" asked Titch. "Do you know anybody else that's had a chip go bad?" Galen asked. Titch screwed up his lips and shook his head. "See," Galen said, "I don't either. Just me." "And they've changed it?" asked Titch. "After the 3rd time, yes," Galen said. Titch poked out his lower lip and nodded. "Could be you then, couldn't it?" As the mass of people finally cleared into the street, Galen waved to his friend and hurried along to work. He pulled his jacket tightly against the early morning chill. "Can't spare you," the supervisor told him. He had hardly looked up to acknowledge Galen. "But I can't concentrate with it flashing and blinking the way it does," Galen argued. "We got a quota. You know how it is." The supervisor lifted his head long enough to look behind Galen. A queue had formed. "Next," he called. Galen turned and offered an apologetic nod to the woman behind him. He'd met her before. Asuda was her name. She had a pleasant smile. At his station, he glanced up at the banner adorning the upper section of the wall. On it were the words, "It takes all of us." He considered this as he addressed the work that had piled up in his absence. When he started on the first piece, he performed his process as he'd done for as long as he could remember. He could do it with his eyes closed. He knew better than to try. If he did, there would be repercussions. "How will they know?" he muttered aloud. Normally, his chip monitored his actions. With its malfunction, he might get away with it. He closed his eyes and grabbed the lump of material. Without looking, he added the pieces from his station, securing them as he always had. Once completed, he inspected his work. Not a screw out of place. He smiled to himself. There was something to be said for repetition after all. He looked down the line. At the next station, Egron was staring at him. Galen nodded to the man who had been receiving his work for better than a decade. Egron frowned in response and turned back to his own work. "What was going through your mind when—" The sudden flash startled him, coming and going as the others had. It had been several hours since any EC made it through to his device. He wondered whether this was a sign that the chip would fail completely. That would certainly alert state agents and solve his problem. He had not gotten through the backlog before the noon bell signaled lunch. He would have to remain until the work was done. When dinner arrived, he was still attaching panels and applying screws. By the time he left the factory floor, he had only moonlight to guide him and an empty stomach to spur him home. He stopped at C.A.WynnSciFi's apartment and accepted some of her bread. "But you'll have to tell them," she said, when he'd reminded her of the glitch. "I would think they know," he said. He was right. A knock woke him from his sleep. There was no light outside his window, so he had no idea of the time. In only underwear, he scuffled to the door. As the door creaked open, light spilled in from several lamps. Galen peered through eye slits to find 3 large men. They pushed past him, their lamps searching the darkness of his apartment. "Galen Arnold, chip number 07011205514, barked Officer Reeve. "Yes," Galen responded as he squeezed his eyes shut against the light. "You are in violation of Civil Code 23-1073, failure to maintain an active neural device." "I requested a repair," Galen said. "We've just moved you to the front of the queue," said the officer. Galen forced his eyes open. He could not make out any of the men in the room. The only thing he saw were the lamps held loosely in their hands. "Can I get dressed?" he asked. It was late in the morning when Galen finally left the state facility. They had replaced his chip, and he'd endured several hours of reconditioning. His factory was a few kilometers away. Unaccustomed to seeing the city in the light of day, he slowed to enjoy the walk. At night, the city was cold and gray. The sunlight did not improve the color, but it did add some warmth. By the time he'd gotten to work, his station's backlog was enough to keep him busy through both the lunch and dinner bells. "I said you couldn't be spared," barked the supervisor. It was another day with very little to eat. He didn't have the heart to ask Shizue for her scraps. Instead, he climbed past her floor, pausing only to catch his breath. "What is that like?" The young starlet in his mind gushed about how proud her parents were. Galen wondered if he had ever been that young. On his floor, the door was stuck again. He'd learned to leave it as is. In the hall, the stairway light reached his door. When he lit the candle, he saw that it would not last much longer. Wax had pulled at the bottom, but the wick was nearly spent. The next morning, he found himself among people he didn't know. That was not uncommon. He'd seen people come and go in this building. He knew fewer and fewer, with Titch and Shizue his only friends. The rush of people leaving his building forced him off his course. Galen was turned around, heading east rather than west. "We live in uncertain times." The motherly face appeared as always, but this time it seemed to be talking directly to him. Her head nodded in a way he didn't remember. Her smile appeared more immediate, more real than ever before. It was an odd sensation, imagining that they were having a conversation. He looked around, finding the streets unfamiliar. Only the morning chill was the same. He pulled his jacket closer and began walking, hoping the movement would warm him. He was surprised to find himself alone on these streets where empty buildings towered above. Several blocks later, he stopped short. He'd gotten out of breath. The next image in his mind was of an older athlete explaining the heartbreak of falling short of his dreams. The man was near tears as he responded to the interviewer's questions. Galen noticed a smell in the air. It was familiar, though distant. Sea salt and fish, as best he could recall. How long had it been since he'd visited the water? He didn't remember. How could he live so close to it without strolling along the waterfront from time to time? He rose before the sun and usually returned home after the day was over. This routine had been his life for so long. Pleasant strolls with time for himself had somehow become a distant memory. The athlete's face blinked out, along with his voice. Galen wondered if this chip was already glitching. "We live in uncertain times." Rather than the motherly face, a toothless hag with a haze over one eye delivered the message. The image was so jarring that he stopped in the middle of an intersection. He looked around. He was still alone on the streets that had likely been busy in the past. Several blocks ahead, he saw the waterfront. Determined to reach it, he picked up his pace. The toothless hag remained, superimposed over the nearing water. This is what uncertain times really look like, she said. Galen's heart began to race. The closer he got to the water, the more menacing the face seemed to be. To his left, he caught a glimpse of movement. Two people emerged from an alleyway. They were dressed differently from him, with long coats and hats pulled down to their eyes. His pace slowed as he realized they were heading toward him. Before he knew it, they barred his way to the water. "Galen Arnold?" said the shorter figure. It was a woman's voice, though low and gruff. "Yes, what is this?" he asked, his breath heavy. "We don't have much time," the woman said. "They will be following you." "They?" asked Galen. "You know who I'm talking about," she said. The taller person grabbed his arm, guiding him to his right, onto a side street. This person pressed him against a wall and removed a device from their coat. Small, delicate hands passed over the device. Galen found the woman's eyes, mostly hidden beneath the brim of her hat. "You wonder why you're here," the raspy woman's voice continued. "We understand your confusion. We were just like you once. Please don't respond or ask questions. They're listening to you. Nothing we can do about that." I just left my building and," Galen stuttered. The shorter woman raised a finger to her hidden lips, signaling for him to remain quiet. "You're here because we lured you. There isn't time to explain all of it." "But he said. She shook her head slowly, her eyes drawn tightly to his. "If you'll just listen, we can send you back." The other woman held the device nearer his head. "It's the new protocol. The mod will be iffy." "We are trying to fix your chip," the woman said in her distinctly raspy voice. "Not so that you would notice, but more importantly, not so they will." In his mind, light and images flashed before him. Familiar and unfamiliar voices of his EC popped in and out as well. Garbled, distorted sounds accompanied these. "We caused what you've been experiencing as glitches," the gruff woman continued. "They were meant to get you here. We needed you closer to do more." "Why me?" Galen asked. She raised her finger again. "Why not?" she answered. Galen warily caught the taller woman's eyes. She was intent on her device, her fingers moving deftly over a screen he could barely see. When she finally stopped, she turned to her partner and nodded. "It will work, for now." The shorter woman tugged on Galen's jacket. "You'll need to keep walking down to the water. You cannot talk about us. They can't hear us, but they can hear you, and they are on their way. When they take you, mention nothing about us. They will not let you live long if they find out." The two women headed down the side street. Galen watched as they disappeared down an alley. He looked around, trying to make out the place where he stood. The smell of salt water reminded him of where he was going. He turned and resumed his walk toward the waterfront. Galen was overlooking the water when they came. A black vehicle hovered above the street behind him, filling the air with sound and dust. Two others quickly joined it, floating above the water. A deep voice boomed with authority behind him, though he could not make out what it said. He didn't remember them grabbing him. When he awoke, he was in a state facility. The room where he sat looked the same as the one he'd been taken to before, though he couldn't be sure. Its plain gray walls and antiseptic air could have been from any state facility he'd been to. This time, his detention was much longer. His interrogation was much less cordial as well. No EC interrupted his stay. By the time he was released, the dinner bell had passed. It would be another day without food. "You shouldn't have done that," C.A.WynnSciFi said when he told her about it. He was sitting on the floor again, his back to the lone window in the room. "I don't know what happened. I got turned around," he said. C.A.WynnSciFi closed her eyes. "So you kept seeking a soft place to land," she said. "Before I knew it, I was lost," he said. C.A.WynnSciFi opened her eyes. "And the state?" "What you would expect," he said. "Was it your chip?" she asked. Galen shook his head. "I guess so. I don't know." He considered telling her everything about the two women he'd met and how they tampered with his device. Remembering their warning, he held his tongue. If he relayed it to anyone, it would have to be without speech. His eyes darted around the bare apartment. He didn't remember ever seeing writing materials in C.A.WynnSciFi's place. He'd always known that the state listened, just as they monitored where he was. He didn't think they could listen to everyone at all times. At this point, he had to assume they were listening. His recent behavior warranted it. "Tell us, were you scared when you realized you would have to run into a burning building?" The woman in his mind shook her head. Her hair was disheveled, her face smeared with a black substance, probably from the fire. C.A.WynnSciFi closed her eyes, watching the same woman in her own mind. Galen rose slowly, trying not to disturb her. He slipped quietly out into the hall, leaving her to the harrowing story. When he pulled the covers over himself that night, he thought about the two women in the street. He wondered where they were, how they knew of him, and why they did what they did. These thoughts and his hunger brought sleep to him. "We were forced to have others do your work," the supervisor told him when he returned the next day. The man's stare was full of reproach. Galen was too hungry to care. At his station, Galen found rejects from the prior day, along with the growing backlog of the morning. He would never be able to clear this queue before the noon bell. He might not make dinner either. "Leap and the net will appear." The voice was raspy, like that of the woman he'd met in the street. In his mind, he saw her face. She was among the most beautiful women he had ever seen. Her face was round, her eyes bright, and her skin lacked the sallow quality of those around him. He felt the hope in her voice. It buoyed him in a way he didn't know was possible. The motherly face returned, replacing the beautiful woman. "We live in uncertain times." Her voice was somehow less soothing than he remembered. That night, he found himself in Titch's apartment. On one wall, parchment hung bearing his friend's name, Teachermere Blasey. It bestowed on the man the honor of an advanced degree. Galen didn't recognize the discipline. "Theoretical physics," Titch explained as he set some bread and meat on the counter. "What's that?" Galen asked. "It means I used to think a lot. Now, not so much," said Titch. Galen felt a little embarrassed by how greedily he devoured the meat. He couldn't remember how many days it had been since he'd eaten. Titch offered Galen his portion. "I don't have more, but I can get some if you need." "Did you know they listen?" Galen asked, accepting the meat. "Of course they listen. What else would they do?" said Titch. "I assumed they did, but I wasn't sure," Galen said. "It is for our well-being, this listening. We live in uncertain times," said Titch. Galen nodded. He wasn't sure whether Titch was repeating the mantra or believed it. Could he risk telling this man about the waterfront? Would they both be in danger if he revealed too much? "When I studied physics, it was to learn about things very big and very small," Titch continued. "Turns out, even the largest things in life are entwined with the smallest. One cannot exist without the other." "Do you mean the state?" Galen asked. "The state?" Titch waved his hand. "No, that is not such a large thing. I'm talking about stars, galaxies. Even the greatest of them is comprised of particles so tiny that we cannot see them. Some of them are little more than a theory." Galen tore off a piece of bread and inserted it into his mouth. He was trying to restrain himself, but he had gone too long already. "I'm sorry, but I'm so hungry." "Nothing to be sorry about. Even the smallest particle needs energy," said Titch. "How would we expect to serve the largest?" "This physics, why don't you do that now?" Galen asked. "The state didn't want me to," said Titch. "I am better suited for small engine repair, or so I'm told." "Is that what you do?" Galen asked. "I do whatever is asked of me," said Titch. Galen nodded. "I suppose we all do." The next morning, Galen found himself standing over an empty station at work. He'd caught up on his backlog and was waiting for the line to feed him something more. As he stared at the slogan lining the top of the walls, he considered Titch's comments about physics. He didn't see how a man who knew something so complex would be more useful as an engine repairman. We live in uncertain... The motherly face returned, distracting him. The beautiful woman quickly replaced this image. Leap, and the net will appear. He instantly felt warmed by her voice, the words, and her smile. Remember, don't speak. I will hear, but so will they. I wouldn't want them to be your last words. He felt instantly flooded with fear. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had such a feeling. You are not alone, she continued. We grow in numbers every day. One day soon, we will ask for your help. As her face faded, a young man took its place, relaying his feelings about a recent sporting event. 2 weeks after his encounter on the waterfront, state agents appeared at his workstation. They removed him to their facility for another interrogation. You lash out in your sleep, said a large man with a thick beard. This is something new for you. Has your EC been operating properly? My device is working as far as I can tell, Galen said. Though it took some effort, he kept his voice even and measured. You had a new chip inserted, the man said. I haven't had any issues with it, said Galen. We had to retrieve you from the water, the agent said. Galen frowned. I was confused. It hasn't happened since. We are aware, the man said. You understand that we monitor you for your safety. Of course. Thank you, Galen said. He had grown accustomed to telling them exactly what they wanted to hear. In the past, this would have been because he believed these things. Since his experience with the beautiful woman, it had become a facade. When he exited the state facility, the motherly face greeted him. We live in uncertain times, she said. The beautiful woman's gruff voice quickly replaced that vision, this time with a different message. Preparations are underway. Stay alert. Awareness is the greatest agent for change. Galen couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so alive. He was part of something that was unlike anything he'd experienced before, mysterious as it was. If it went on like this for another week or a lifetime, he no longer cared. He was sitting with C.A.WynnSciFi 3 days later. That's when the alert came. It appeared on everyone's chip, a stern warning from the motherly face. We live in uncertain times, she said. Great dangers await us if we don't remain together as one. What could it mean? C.A.WynnSciFi asked him. Galen didn't answer. His mind had been interrupted by the beautiful woman's voice. Leap, and the net will appear, was all she said. Galen? C.A.WynnSciFi asked, a tremble in her voice. We have to go, Galen said, rising from his corner of the room. C.A.WynnSciFi stared at him, unmoving. Stay if you will, he told her, but I'm leaving. Where? She asked. I don't know, but I can't stay here, he said. When he opened the door to the stairwell, Galen found Titch waiting on the landing. I thought you might be here, Titch said. I checked your apartment on my way down. Then you know? Galen asked. Only as much as you do, said Titch. Why didn't you tell me? Galen asked. For the same reason you didn't tell me, said Titch. The two of them began the slow climb down. They were not alone. A few others were on the stairs, their voices reverberating from above and below. The sound was not the same as the morning buzz, but it filled Galen with more hope than he could remember having. When they reached the final landing, Galen paused, his hand on the doorknob. He imagined the raspy voice whispering, Leap, and the net will appear. With that thought, he pulled the door open for his friend. In wafted the faint, distant tang of salt water. Breathing deeply, Galen stepped out
into the evening air.